Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host for this week, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is alongside me once again. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. And of course, there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast description box below. We're going to have a little bit of a chat on this podcast about how Liverpool have been getting on so far. We are only 7 games in the Premier League, Tom, but we're already at the second international break. It's a little bit frustrating, isn't it, when these international breaks come around, but it does at least give us a bit of a chance to have a little bit of a look back, a little bit of a rest, and I'm sure that's exactly what Arne Slot and his coaching team are doing behind the scenes this week as well.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I mean, the games do start coming kind of thick and fast, don't they, with European games and cup games in the middle of it all as well. But yeah, like you say, the second international break now, and obviously when we came back last time, we obviously fell to defeat against Nottingham Forest. So I guess the challenge for Arne Slot now will be to kind of galvanise the team when they do come back. Obviously, there's a lot of players where they're travelling to all kind of corners of the globe, really. So yeah, we're hoping that, that momentum that, has been built up over the past few weeks since the first international break. Hopefully that can be sustained, I think, after the second break. So yeah, it's one of them where it brings up new questions, I think, for the coaching team. But yeah, I think hopefully they'll be able to navigate that.
Yeah, it's certainly gone well enough so far. We've discussed plenty of times what went wrong against Nottingham Forest, but the rest of the matches, obviously Liverpool have won all of those, as we've discussed as well plenty of times. Not exactly the hardest fixtures necessarily, but I wouldn't necessarily want to play down an away win at Manchester United or a trip to the San Siro as well. It's not necessarily really, really easy for Liverpool, but there are, as you say, much bigger and much more difficult games for Liverpool to come just around the corner. But for this show, we're going to have a little bit of a look through the squad, really. We'll start with the goalkeepers. We're not going to rate every single player, but we are going to kind of rate each department, if you like. And this would have probably been quite boring until the weekend. Obviously, plenty of interesting things happened in the match down at Crystal Palace. Obviously, Rubin Kelleher was out with illness. Addison picks up the injury and Vítězslav Jaros comes in. We'll start with that. We'll talk a little bit about Addison more generally in a second, but just to give a word on Jaros, he was excellent, and it wouldn't have been the most easy set of circumstances to come into, I suppose, for him.
Yeah, I think if you'd have told him at the start of the week that he'd end up making his debut, he might not have believed it, but everything kind of fell in his favour a little bit. And yeah, obviously the injury to Addison, it is a concern, but I think he did really well when he came in, like you say. And there was a couple of moments. I think there was a shot from Eze, wasn't there? And there was a couple of kind of half opportunities that he had to close off in the box as well. So I think he held his own really well, and it is promising in a way. I think, like Slot kind of touched upon, that you basically got 3 very good goalkeepers there. And yeah, that kind of decision not to allow him to leave in the summer, it looks a bit of a masterstroke, really, in terms of, just keeping bodies around the squad, really. So yeah, obviously Kelleher was out through illness, and you'd imagine if there's a long kind of, Addison being on the sidelines for a while, then, Kelleher would be that kind of second choice to come in and sort of deputise for him. But to have Jaros there as well, I think, it obviously it paid dividends, didn't it, having him on the bench there. And yeah, he did really well when he came on.
Yeah, the Addison injury is a really strange one. He seems to pick up these injuries quite often for a goalkeeper, which I don't really know what you can do about that. I'm not quite sure actually how it happened as well. He obviously kicks the ball into touch. I'm not sure whether that was when it happened or when he was just doing that to kind of bring on the medical team. But he's obviously been out for, I think, 10 or 12 games it was last season. He's missed games this season already. He's looking now set to be on the sidelines for a while. We don't yet know at this moment in time exactly how long that's going to be. We're still waiting for the results of the scan to come back on that. But it is a strange one, isn't it? It probably explains why Liverpool went and got Mamardashvili during the summer, obviously with one eye on Kelleher maybe leaving at some point. It's just a bit of a reminder, really, to whoever is the second choice, whether that's Kelleher or somebody else moving forwards. There's always going to be an opportunity there. I think there's obviously, a huge amount of upside that you get with Addison. I'm sure you're probably in agreement with me that he's maybe the best player in that position in the world at this moment in time. But Liverpool have always got to have a strong second choice when he's there, because the only drawback with him really is those injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been seasons, I think even the league winning season, where I think Adrian had to step in for, I think, 8-9 games. So yeah, for how good Addison is, you always need kind of a deputy who can step in, who's good enough, essentially. I think in Kelleher, to be fair to him, I think he is a top-end Premier League goalkeeper. And, I do kind of have a bit of sympathy for him in that respect, that he deserves game time. But yeah, he's always looked ready whenever he's come in. He's never let Liverpool down. Obviously, he played in cup finals and, excelled really. He's been able to handle the pressure really well. So yeah, I think that, like you say, it's the only downside with Addison really, for how good he is. He does pick up the odd kind of injury here and there. But yeah, being able to kind of juggle that, I guess, across the squad is the big question for the management team, and having a couple of players in every position where they're good enough to kind of, be in a kind of a title hunt, you'd imagine is kind of the target really for Liverpool this season, like any season. So, not having that big drop off is a big thing. And I think thankfully for Slot, kind of in the goalkeeping position, there are enough options there, I think, to kind of carry Liverpool through. Although kind of Addison, he's a massive miss, I think that Kelleher, he has enough to kind of, pull through, I reckon. And he should be good enough, I think, to deputise quite well, I think, as well. So I don't have many worries in that sense. But yeah, it's a good problem to have, I think, for the manager as well, that he's got that many options to kind of fall back on.
Yeah, it is a tricky balance, isn't it? But we've already seen this season, and I'm sure we're going to see after the internationals as well, when Addison probably is going to be out for a little period, that it is obviously hugely beneficial. But just quickly then, as we're going to do for each of these sections, let's go for a rating out of 10. I think it's always hard to judge a goalkeeper, particularly when Liverpool are winning games and not really conceding too many goals, because they don't have a great deal to do. But what would you say, maybe sort of an 8 out of 10 so far for the goalkeeping department? Is that about fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think they've done really well, and obviously having 3 goalkeepers who had to step in at some stage, none of them have kind of let Liverpool down over the course of their season so far. So yeah, I think they've done really well, and only 2 goals conceded, obviously, in the league as well. So that tells its own story. So yeah, I think it's been a really good kind of performance all around from all 3 of them. So yeah, about an 8 out of 10, I'd say as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the defence then. Obviously, a couple of changes in that early on, but not much rotation really beyond that. We've had a couple of changes at left back. There was obviously wholesale changes for the Carabao Cup game and things like that. But what have you made of the defence so far, and what changes have you spotted really within that defence compared to what we saw last season?
Yeah, it's been really impressive. I think in terms of, the overall structure, it kind of seems quite similar in some respects. I think there's more emphasis placed maybe on building out from the back, in the sense that I don't think the manager necessarily wants us to be as direct. Not to say the Klopp was direct, but I think there's less of the kind of 40-yard passes from Van Dijk, for example, and that kind of thing. That there's more patience, I think, in the build-up and that sort of thing, particularly from the full-back. So that's been a little bit different. But overall, I think the main takeaway is how solid Liverpool have been defensively. There hasn't been much rotation, really, in the centre-back position other than that first game. Obviously, Quansah started. And then I think it's been Van Dijk and Konate since then. But I do think over the course of the season, we will see more kind of interchange, maybe with injuries and just kind of general rotation as well. But yeah, the full-back position, it's an interesting one to weigh up, really. There's not been many changes, I don't think, in terms of sort of style of play or anything like that. But yeah, I think Robertson's played every game in the Premier League so far this season, and obviously there's been a little bit more rotation with Tsimikas on his side, and obviously then Trent, the first choice, with Conor Bradley underneath him as well. So yeah, I think stylistically everything seems quite similar really to the Klopp era. But yeah, I've been really impressed with how solid they've been, and they really look a unit, as they have for years, really. And, it's good to see that there's not been any drop-off in that respect as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. Virgil van Dijk stopped in the mix zone. I can't remember which game it was after now, but I think it was some point last week, and he was asked sort of what are the changes, and he said similar to you, really. It's not massively different, but there are differences more in terms of in possession, really, for him and Konate, which I think particularly with Konate, obviously we know how good Van Dijk can be with his feet, but Konate, I think there was a bit of a question mark really in my head about how well he'd be able to adapt, and maybe Jarell Quansah was a little bit more comfortable on the ball, and obviously in the past Liverpool have had Joe Matip, who was exceptional at kind of those dribbles out and dribbles into midfield and that kind of thing. So there was a bit of a question mark really in terms of how they might adapt, but I think they've both done really, really well. We still see the long balls from Virgil van Dijk, who can switch the play and things like that, but it's obviously a little bit more involved for them in terms of the build-up. And I suppose the only other sort of slight difference that we've seen really is in Trent. He's not necessarily fixed to going inside all of the time. I think there are certain points where it's almost a bit like it was under Jurgen Klopp maybe 2 years ago, or maybe a little bit more than that even, in terms of staying out wide and finding that space. I think for me that's where you see the best of Trent really, is where you kind of let him pick where the space is. There's no point him being in the middle if all the other players are in the middle and the space out wide. You want him to go into that space as well. I think it's been a really, really strong start to the season for him in terms of that. And Trent was another one who stopped a couple of weeks ago and said, he feels his defensive side of his game is overly criticised at certain points by pundits. Have you seen much of a change in terms of him defensively this season? Because I think it's probably fair that he's been more defensively secure than he has been at certain points, but I'm not sure whether that's him as an individual, or maybe it's just because Liverpool are a bit more controlled.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that thing of risk and reward. And I think, at points last season, particularly when he was going more into midfield, there was more risk involved, I think, defensively in that respect. People were having to kind of fill in and that sort of thing. There does seem to be a lot of flexibility, I think, in terms of if he was to kind of step into midfield, someone would kind of fill that gap and that sort of thing. But yeah, I do think there's more of a structure, I'd say, in that back four from what I've noticed under Slot. And, I think that's kind of fed into that defensive record that's been outstanding so far this season. And to be fair to Trent, I think, like you said there, he has looked more kind of solid as well. It looks a real unit, that back four at the moment. And, he's formed a big part of that on the kind of defensive side of it as well. So yeah, I've been quite impressed with him in that respect, which, obviously he does get that criticism from time to time. But yeah, I have been kind of, quite impressed with kind of how he's done it in that respect. I think the only thing that I do go back to is, obviously there was a bit of experimentation in the Forest game where Slot obviously put him into midfield. I think that was quite telling, because that kind of said to me that he didn't want to kind of have him stepping into midfield from the kind of right back position. He kind of wanted to kind of see whether that was feasible to use him as an option there, maybe. It didn't quite work, I'd say. So I do think that'll be more of a kind of fixed role for him now, that right back position. And it does look more similar, I'd say, like you said before, to kind of the earlier years of Klopp, where it was more of a fixed position, that right back role. So yeah, I have been impressed with him. And I think he's formed part of a unit, which is good to see as well. And obviously the defensive record's been outstanding so far this season from Liverpool. So yeah, I think onwards and upwards for all the players in that back four. So yeah, I've been really impressed so far.
Yeah, it's been a solid start, I'd say, for the defence. I'd probably go similar to the goalkeepers, really. There's not really, a really elite performance that I can think of, or a performance where they've had to be elite in terms of the attacks against them and things like that. So it's probably similar again, isn't it, all the way across that back four? I'd say probably an 8 out of 10, maybe a slightly less for 1 or 2 games, but it's been pretty solid, I think, collectively so far. Yeah,
I'd agree. 8 out of 10. Yeah, I think the record that they built up so far, I'm really impressed with. So yeah, a high score for them, I'd say.
Yep, let's move on to the midfield then. probably slightly more tricky to analyse. I think there's maybe been a bit more variance in terms of the quality of the options in that department. We'll start with the obvious one, though. Ryan Gravenberch, I think, is one that you could probably give maybe a 9 out of 10 so far, just for him as an individual. Maybe even slightly higher if you were being, completely kind to him. But I think he's obviously been the story of the season so far. And I think him and Alexis McAllister, that kind of double pivot as it is, even though Arne Slot is very keen to say that it's not a 2, it's more of a 4-3-3. It's very, very good to see. I think that the two of those players working so well together.
Yeah, it is great to see, and the interplay between them is fantastic as well. And they're both so comfortable on the ball, they're great in possession. And yeah, they're both kind of comfortable getting the ball off the keeper or the defence and kind of building out from there, which is great to see. But yeah, like you say, Gravenberch, he has been one of the stories of the season, particularly kind of coming out of the summer where there was so much talk about whether Liverpool needed an option in that position. And obviously, it was well documented, the approach for Zubamendi as well. But kind of everything's kind of fell in Liverpool's favour in that respect. And it's allowed him that opportunity out of nowhere, really, to show what he's made of. And I think I said last time when I was on, 3 or 4 years ago, Gravenberch was seen as one of the standout kind of talents in Europe, weren't he? And I think that he's beginning to show that in abundance now in a Liverpool shirt. And his first season, obviously, I think he did okay, and he showed elements of that talent, being able to bring the ball out and, them kind of marauding runs through midfield and his passing range and that sort of thing. But that's been plain to see this season. And, I think playing alongside someone like McAllister has probably helped him as well, because he's another player who'll show for the ball and, kind of take that pressure off him. There's not as much kind of, there's not as much pressure kind of put on his shoulders, essentially, I think, to kind of build out for them attacks and kind of pull the strings in midfield. So having two players who can kind of, bounce off each other, I think has been really helpful for Slot in them early weeks of the season.
I think one of the most interesting things that I've seen from Gravenberch this season is that he's managed to perfect that move where he just lets the ball roll across him and then he gets his body in the right position. Yeah. I think he did try and do that quite a lot last season, but maybe just needed a bit of time to get used to the physicality and the speed. But it seems like he's fully attuned to what it's like to play, obviously playing in Europe as well, but certainly in the Premier League. He's been, I think, probably a lot more robust as well. We've seen a couple of moments, particularly against Crystal Palace, where Liverpool looked pretty open. He was coming up against a couple of good players. You mentioned Eze before. He's obviously got Adam Wharton as well. I'm a big fan of him. There was a few times, really, where he was kind of on his own. McAllister wasn't a million miles away from him, but particularly when he went off as well in the second half, it was more on Gravenberch to cover that ground on his own. And it seemed like he managed to do that. I suppose a lot of that will be down to confidence as much as anything else, but it looks like Arne Slot's coaching is paying off in terms of that position as well.
Yeah, he's showing experience, I think, beyond his years at the moment. And, it is really impressive, like you say. We really had to kind of grind out a result there at Palace. And I think in times gone by, and maybe other teams, they either struggle to actually see out the victory there, because obviously Liverpool scored quite early in the game, and there's that kind of onslaught then from the home team where the crowd's up and that sort of thing. It's kind of fierce, the atmosphere, isn't it, Selhurst Park at the best of times. So yeah, I think they did really well to kind of weather the storm. And obviously with the goalkeeper coming on, for the final 10 minutes as well, that brought its own little bit of jeopardy to the situation. But Gravenberch, I think, was one of them big players who kind of stepped up, I think, and then that final kind of quarter of an hour where there was that bit more pressure for Palace, and that kind of calmness under pressure that he keeps on showing, that that just keeps on building every week with him. And I think it's really impressive for his age, the performances he's been able to put in so far. And that was another one, really. I think he really stepped up in the Palace game.
Yeah, he was excellent, wasn't he? I think maybe if we're going to go 9 out of 10 for Ryan Gravenberch, maybe 7 or 8 for Alexis McAllister. Maybe that's being slightly harsh to go with a 7, because he has been pretty good. But I think certainly those two have been the pick of the bunch. We've not seen loads of Curtis Jones, because Dominic Szoboszlai has been preferred ahead of him. But I think with both of those players, there's a bit of not a question mark in terms of their quality, but more so in terms of the consistency, really. What have you made of Szoboszlai so far this season in that number 10 position?
I think he's been improved, and I think that it's lent into his kind of natural attribute in a sense, where I think he's a very good runner. He's got that engine, so it's kind of helped him in that respect. I think he's good at kind of arriving late into the box, and we've seen that in the AC Milan game, for example, where he was able to get on the end of something, and I think it was a Cody Gakpo cross, wasn't it? And he was able to get himself a goal. So yeah, I've been impressed in that respect. I do think he's more of a natural fit in that position than maybe the position he played last season under Jurgen Klopp. But I do think with him, it might be one of them where it develops over the course of the season. And you could look back and he might have got kind of 10 goals from midfield, and he's kind of been a pivotal player maybe when the latter rounds of European competition or the domestic cups as well. I can see him being useful there. So yeah, I think it will we'll see over the course of the season. I think with Szoboszlai whether he does kind of make that position his own. Like you say, Curtis Jones is always an option in that position, and I think eventually Harvey Elliott will get more chances. I think obviously he's kind of struggled to get into the team. I think he was injured at the start of the season and stuff. So I think he's only made one appearance so far. I was looking up before. In the Premier League. So I think we're going to see more from him probably in that position at some point as well. And there might be a little bit of healthy competition there for places, which is never a bad thing. But yeah, I think Szoboszlai, I've been impressed. I think he has improved. I think that there's been a couple of performances where maybe he weren't quite at it, but maybe that was more of a team performance thing. But yeah, overall, I'd say it's been an improved performance from him so far this season.
Yeah, it's definitely an improvement on what we saw the second half of last season. I think that's definitely fair, but I think there's probably another level for him to come, probably, as you say, with the goals and the assists, really. If you're going to play in that number 10 position, it's great that he tracks back and fills in at right back for Trent when he goes forward, or he presses and leads from the front in that sense. But I think, to be fair, Arne Slot has said it himself, if you're going to play as a number 10 at the top end of the Premier League for a team that wants to challenge for the Champions League, you've probably got to be maybe not double figures for goals and assists every season, but it's got to be something that he is thinking about. It's strange, though, with him, because he does get into those positions. He just seems sometimes, there was one against Crystal Palace where he looked like he was about to shoot and then cuts back onto his weaker foot and ends up getting crowded out. I wonder with him, is that almost a confidence thing, do you think? Or is that something that maybe you can coach into him? Just that ruthlessness, I suppose, in the final third, really. That is the obvious next step for him to take.
Yeah, I think there's been a running theme with him throughout his Liverpool career where he operates on confidence, and he's at his best, I think, when he's had a real good kind of run of games where he's done well. And yeah, I think you're right. Maybe in them moments where you need to be a bit more clinical, he's maybe struggled in that sense. He's not been as kind of clinical as you would have liked, and that was a prime example, that the one you cited there. And there have been examples like that. I think with him as well, you kind of want to see him take more of the easier chances, really. He likes kind of shooting from range and that sort of thing. But I think sometimes there's the odd chance where you think, a lot of players of that level, or what you'd be expecting from a Liverpool number 10, they'd be sticking that away. And I think that is the challenge now for Szoboszlai, kind of adding them numbers to his game. And I think obviously the manager's being pretty open about that as well. So I think the problem for him is that, if another player does come into that position, Harvey Elliott, for example, and does hit the ground running, would he be able to kind of win his place back? And it is on numbers. I kind of think that position. And, if a player comes in and they start producing, it might be a difficult sell then for him to kind of get himself going again if he does kind of operate on confidence and, getting that kind of momentum in a side. So, yeah, I think that's one little concern with him, that sometimes I think he does operate a little bit too much on confidence, and maybe he's got to find that consistency. And I think the manager, again, was pretty open about that as well. The consistency is the key for him now. So yeah, we'll see moving forward with him. I think he's got all the attributes to play that position. I think we've seen enough of him to say that, obviously with his age as well, that, he's got a lot to give, I think, in this team. But yeah, finding that consistency, I think, is the big thing for him now.
Yeah, I'd probably go at maybe 6 out of 10 so far for him this season. I think there's been times when he's been a little bit above that, and maybe times when he's dropped a little bit below that as well. But I suppose, like you said before, the times when he has been below that have maybe been the Forest game when he wasn't the only one by any means to struggle in that. So, yeah, slightly more varied across the midfield. But let's finish up then with the attack. Obviously, quite a few players to get through. There's been some that we've seen a lot more than others. The obvious one is Luis Diaz, who I think has started brilliantly. Mohamed Salah with some good numbers as well, even though he's not necessarily, in terms of his overall performance at the very highest level, still top for goals and assists combined this season for Liverpool. So those two are probably one of the two first names on the team sheet at the moment, I would say, for Liverpool. What have you made of Diaz and Salah?
Well, I think, first of all, what Slot's been able to get out of the attacking players is quite phenomenal, really. And every player in that attack at the moment seems pretty much rejuvenated. And I think Diaz and Salah, they have been, being able to deliver in terms of the numbers so far. Particularly Diaz, I think there was maybe that question mark whether he could hit them higher end kind of numbers. He struggled with that. I think coming back from injury last season, he wasn't able to kind of hit the sort of numbers that Mo Salah, for example, is able to hit every year. But yeah, he's been really impressive so far this season, and he's looked pretty clinical as well. And obviously he's always had that pace and being able to kind of be a bit of a nuisance in the final third. But that end product sometimes was the big question for Diaz. And I think he's maybe adding that to his game now, which is, an improvement, and it's good to see. With Salah, we know he's always going to get them kind of numbers, and like you say, he's not really being as influential in games, I think, as maybe you would have wanted. But maybe again, that's something that's going to come over the course of the season. And I always think in the bigger games that them tests they're going to start coming up pretty soon. I'd say obviously we've had the United game and AC Milan, but other than that, the other games are kind of ones that you'd expect Liverpool to win. So yeah, I think a big test is kind of coming up with the City game, and then there's a Champions League game in the midweek with Leipzig after that. So, them big games, I think Mo Salah kind of thrives upon. He always seems to deliver in them games as well. So yeah, it's kind of been a par performance, I think, from Mo Salah, even though we shouldn't get too used to the numbers that he produces, but it's hard not to. I think after, is it 8 seasons he's been at Liverpool now, and he's always been able to deliver them kind of numbers. So yeah, I think kind of a par performance from Mo. But yeah, Diaz, big improvement from him, and long may it continue.
Yeah, you can tell Luis Diaz is doing well because Cody Gakpo hasn't been in the team much. When he has played, he's done really well as well. Maybe could have done with 1 or 2 more goals, but I think, the games that he's played, it's hard sometimes to get rhythm when you know that you're only in for one match and then you're going to be back out again at the weekend. So I think I've been just as impressed really with him as the other two. But just a last one, let's talk about the number 9 position. Diogo Jota obviously has the shirt at the moment. Darwin Núñez is trying to get that shirt off him. It does look like a straight battle between those two for that number 9 shirt. But what have you made of it so far? Have you any complaints at all that Jota is the number 1 at the moment? And what happens next for Darwin Núñez with that being the case?
Yeah, I think kind of no complaints from me on the Jota situation. I think that, he's the most reliable finisher, I think, in that centre-forward position. And obviously it always goes back to fitness, I think, with Jota, whether you're able to get that sustained run of games out of him. But yeah, hopefully this season he'll be able to kind of throw off the shackles a little bit in that respect, and hopefully get a run of games together, because I think his goal per game ratio, I think in terms of starters, is really impressive. I seen a stat the other day where, it kind of blew my mind, really, the amount of goals he's been able to get when he started games. So yeah, I think when you're able to get him on the pitch, there's not many better kind of finishers, I don't think, maybe in Europe at the moment. So yeah, getting that kind of sustained run of games for Jota, that's always kind of the big question mark. But at the moment, I don't really see Núñez kind of being able to, sustain the challenge really for that position while he's fit. I was glad for Núñez the other week where he was able to get his goal, and it seemed like a massive relief from him. Obviously, he looked a bit emotional after scoring and stuff. So you can tell how much he cares, and to be fair to him, he does put in the effort. Where he is able to work and kind of do the pressing from the front. I do think he's improved in that respect, Núñez, but he's probably a little bit below Jota, I'd say, just in terms of his overall level and his attributes that he can bring to the team. So if it had to be kind of a shootout between the two, then I think I'd always plumb for Jota. But yeah, I think Núñez over the course of the season, again, he will get minutes. And, a team like Liverpool, you're always hoping that you'll go deep into sort of the cup competitions as well. So that's where he could come into his own. So yeah, and I think the same with Cody Gakpo as well. That when he's been able to play, I think he's been fantastic. And again, we'll see more of him over the course of the season, I'm sure. But yeah, at the moment, I think Núñez is below Jota in the pecking order. But you have to be ready in a squad like Liverpool's, and there will be injuries at some stage, and you just never know when your opportunity is going to come. We've seen that with the goalkeeping position at the weekend. So equally the same could happen with this kind of centre forward position, and we could be speaking in a month where Núñez is getting a run of games, and maybe he's getting that momentum kind of back. So yeah, I think there's still more to come from Núñez, but at the moment he's below Jota in the pecking order, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's a big season as well for Darwin Núñez. He's obviously had 2 years of getting used to things, and it's now the case that you've got to kind of put the ball in the back of the net regularly. The chances will come. It's just a case of can he be calm enough and cool enough and keep himself in the right positions often enough to score the volume of goals that Liverpool are going to need him to get. But just to finish then, a rating, as we've done for all of the parts of the pitch. In terms of the attack, I think there's probably more to come, but it's still been, a really good start. Probably similar to the defence, really, I'd say, in terms of the level is sort of 8 out of 10, about what you were thinking for this.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone, when they've come in, has done a good job, and I've been really impressed with that. And I think, again, Slot's been able to galvanise that attack, which is a really good sign. So, yeah, about 8 out of 10, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we've said that for most departments, haven't we? I think we went for that for the goalkeeper, the defence and the attack. The midfield with a little bit of improvement to do, but Ryan Gravenberch slightly ahead of that as well. So, yeah, it's been a good start, hasn't it, for Liverpool so far this season. Still more to improve on, though, and I'm sure we will see that across the course of the next few weeks as well. As you mentioned before, Tom, there's been lots of good matches so far, but lots of much bigger matches to come over the course of the next couple of months. I'm sure we will discuss them all on this podcast and plenty more across the Blood Red channel as well. But I think that will just about do us for this week. Thank you very much for everyone at home for watching and listening along. And we'll be back next week with the Liverpool.com podcast.